Well, good morning, everyone. Today, as I discussed, we're going to talk about Amsorb Plus and how to present this to your customers. We've had responsibility for Amsorb Plus marketing for about, like I said, I think it's about 15 years or more. So it's been a long period of time. And it is our #1 product from a revenue standpoint and a sales standpoint and a profitability standpoint. So it's a great product for us. And we're lucky to have it. I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint presentation that I'm hopeful that you're able to see. And then put everybody on mute. But can you see an Amsorb Plus PowerPoint presentation on your display?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for the response. Okay. Okay, so basically, what is the reason people use Amsorb? It really has to do with safety, product safety. This is a little bit about Bell Medical. I often like to do a little commercial on Bell Medical and the manufacturer and on yourself. But Bell Medical, for those that don't know, has been a specialty distributor for medical products, specifically anesthesia, since 1975. We are headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. We are the importer of record for Amsorb Plus and are exclusive in about 20 states for the company. And we have a national sales force that covers both the United States and Canada. Armstrong Medical is out of Northern Ireland, and they specialize in all kinds of things, but our main product with them is Amsorb Plus. What is CO2 absorbent and why is it used? Well, this little area is the CO2 absorbent, and this is simulating kind of a circuit or an anesthesia machine breathing system, basically. And all anesthesia machines work on what's called a circle system, and that's what is represented here. So the reason why they do that is because anesthetic agents are very expensive, and even oxygen is expensive. So if they can have that patient rebreathe some of their own air and some of their own anesthetic agents, they will reduce the cost of that anesthetic. So all anesthesia machines are set up to do what's called a circle system. So basically, you will inspire oxygen and anesthetic agents. The patient will inhale it, and then when they exhale it, it goes through an expiratory valve, and it goes through. Part of it goes, excess gas might go to a scavenger, but if you're doing low flows, it'll actually, let me mute everybody. Okay, so basically when you exhale, the exhaled gases go through the anesthesia machine again and go through an absorbent canister, which is what we are selling. That absorbent canister scrubs the CO2 from the exhaled breath, and then it is returned back to the patient for them to rebreathe. So as a result, you don't have to use as much oxygen. The anesthetic agent gets inhaled and exhaled and rebreathed, and that's kind of what the CO2 absorbent does. It absorbs CO2. Basic biology is when you inhale, you're inhaling air. Air has 21% oxygen in it. When you exhale, you're exhaling CO2. So CO2 is the waste product, or if you will, the poop of the cell. So when I do work, let me turn this off. When I do work of muscle contraction, etc., that's metabolism, and the metabolism byproduct of that is CO2. So the muscle tissue takes up the oxygen and it disposes CO2. The CO2 goes to the lungs exhale it, and then it goes through this breathing system. But basically, every time you exhale, you're exhaling CO2. Just an aside note that's kind of interesting, the Apollo 13 mission that almost did not have those astronauts come back alive, the problem was not that they didn't have enough oxygen up there, it was that their CO2 absorber had gotten damaged in their stirring of the oxygen, if you will, or whatever their explosion they had. And as a result, they were exhaling CO2 in the capsule, and it wasn't getting scrubbed. So they were about to suffocate themselves because, not because they didn't have too much oxygen, but basically they couldn't open the window up in space and let out that CO2. They were able to figure out a way to redesign and fix their CO2 absorbent, and that's what allowed them the time to get back to Earth. So CO2 absorbent is used obviously in space, It's used in submarines. So basically, it's taking the exhaled CO2 that you exhale on a routine basis. It's scrubbing it, pulling the CO2 off, and just leaving the oxygen so that you can rebreathe. Okay, so that's kind of the idea behind the absorbent, the reason we have absorbent in the first place. And what are the safety benefits of Amsorb Plus? We're going to talk about the dangers and the deficiencies of soda lime. Soda lime is what's traditionally used, and soda lime has a chemical called sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is the bane or the problem with all CO2 absorbents that are based on high alkalines or soda limes. We're going to talk about current practices, environmental benefits of Amsorb, the financial benefits of Amsorb Plus, and sourcing benefits of Amsorb Plus. Okay, so dangers and efficiencies. CO2 absorbents such as soda lime contain sodium hydroxide. It's NaOH. That is a toxic, or I shouldn't say toxic, it's a caustic chemical, and when it's there's basically only small percentages of it in traditional absorbents such as soda limes. It can be only 2 or 3%, but that 2 or 3% is the triggering agent that allows that absorbent to absorb CO2. But as the absorbent loses its hydration or its moisture, the sodium hydroxide content increases, and it makes the chemical more caustic and more dangerous. So basically, when you have increased concentrations of sodium hydroxide, which is in effect you have maybe 3%, but as the moisture goes out, that percentage goes up. That creates 3 side effects, 3 toxins that can produce. Compound A, which is damaging to our liver. Formaldehyde, which is an irritant, so it causes vomiting and nausea. We've all smelled formaldehyde when we were in biology class and dissecting a frog or whatever, and to breathe that directly can cause nausea and vomiting in the PACU or in the recovery room. And then carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, obviously, it's basically tailpipe gas. It attaches to oxygen and fools the system into thinking that it's got oxygen in it, yet it's not able to be used by the muscle tissues to actually use the oxygen because it's bound with CO. So carbon monoxide basically is a toxin that you would not want to deliver. So those are the 3 toxins that any soda lime that has sodium hydroxide can produce. Now, they typically only produce those when they become dehydrated or they lose their moisture content. So what happens is the sodium hydroxide percent rises as the absorbent gets used and gets dried out, and that ends up reproducing these toxins. Now, anesthesia is all aware of these toxins. Some anesthesia providers don't really believe in them, that they really cause problems because they're only exposed to them for a couple hours, maybe during surgery. But the key thing is why would you use an absorbent that produces or has the potential to produce these toxins when, for basically a price matching strategy or roughly the same price, you could be using an absorbent that has been proven and designed to never produce these toxins. So soda lime is highly corrosive. It's bad for the environment. Basically, soda limes or anything with sodium hydroxide after it's been used has a higher pH than Amsorb Plus. And if you get over 14 I think it's pH, yeah, then you are damaging our water supply when you dispose of it in a landfill. States such as California and Washington require you to red bag your absorbent after you've used it if you're using a soda lime. And a soda lime would be substances such as Medizorb, Sodazorb. All of them, if they contain 2 to 3% of sodium hydroxide, they are considered a soda lime, which is a high alkali content. So once again, if you're a green earth person and you want to do something for the environment, you don't want to be putting something in landfills that is caustic and is corrosive and is bad for our environment. You also, if you're an anesthesia tech, you don't want to be inhaling the dust from those caustic materials. Whereas Amsorb Plus, as it gets used, it becomes more of an antacid. It's almost like a Tums. It goes from calcium hydroxide to sodium bicarbonate, and sodium bicarbonate is almost like a Tums, an antacid. So it's not something you can ingest necessarily, but it's not harmful to the environment or even harmful for you to touch as an anesthesia tech. So some of the problems with soda limes also is they have a condition called adsorption, which is different from absorption. But basically, if you look up in the dictionary what does adsorption mean, it means that anytime you pass one chemical through another chemical, a certain part of that one chemical grabs a hold of the chemical passing through, and that's what happens with anesthetic agents. So when you dial in your anesthetic agent, which might be sevoflurane or isoflurane, as it passes through and gets circled around in that circular system, it gets absorbed in the CO2 absorbent, and it adheres some of that agent. So you might dial in 2% of anesthetic agent, but the monitor only shows 1.5%, and part of that agent is getting adsorbed by the soda lime. Amsorb Plus, because it's not a soda lime, does not adsorb as much as a soda lime. So once again, we have the potential for cost savings because you don't waste anesthetic agent. Also, your patients will respond to the anesthetic quicker. So when you dial in 2%, you'll get 2% faster with Amsorb Plus than you will with a soda lime. We also provide irreversible color change. Soda limes reverse in color. So as they're exposed to CO2, they will change to a violet color. And as a result, as they get more and more violet, that kind of simulates danger and problems. So they'll change based on color change. With our absorbent, we change based on desiccation or dryness. So as it's being used, the chemical loses its ability, or loses its moisture and changes color. And as a result, we are a permanent color change. That's why you'll sometimes have physicians or hospitals that will change all their absorbents every Sunday night or every Monday morning because they know on Mondays when they come in, all their absorbent's going to look fresh because they're using soda lime. With Amsorb Plus, when they come in on Monday, if they had a third color change on a Friday, there'll be a third color change on Monday. So they always know where they are with regards to the usage of their absorbent. Whereas with soda lime, you never know really where you are. So soda lime dangers, MSDS is a medical safety data sheet. So it basically, we have all the medical data safety sheets for all the soda limes from Medizorb to Sodazorb to whatever, everybody's, and they all indicate that they have a portion of sodium hydroxide, and if they have that, then they can produce the toxins. How have we evolved with our current practice? Basically, we're trying to mitigate the dangers of these toxins. So what people are doing is they're changing their absorbent more often. They see I've gone to facilities and I've asked the anesthesia managers how often do they change their absorbent. And they say, oh, we change it when it's a third color change. And then I say, would you verify that and ask your anesthesia techs that actually change the absorbent? And I've had them come back and say, no, we change it when it's a fourth color change. So they know that, and sometimes they don't know why they're doing that. The anesthesia techs don't know why they change it as it changes color. They just know it's bad if it changes color. Well, once again, soda limes are bad as they change color because that portion that's changed color could be producing the toxins. So as a result, they change it frequently and they use high gas flows. They also use excessively high vaporizer settings because they want to get to 2%, so sometimes they'll dial 3% to be able to get to that 2% because they know for some reason it's not getting to the patient at 3%. They also should be using masks and gloves, and they need to red bagging their absorbent to make sure that they don't damage the environment, but that's often not really understood. Once again, they often change the absorbent based on color change more frequently than they need. Whereas with Amsorb Plus, we recommend changing upon inspired CO2. Once you start getting inspired CO2, there's no danger with rebreathing your own CO2. In fact, there used to be anesthesia machines that would have CO2 tanks on them so that you could actually dial in CO2. Because what CO2 does is it promotes the brain to stimulate you to breathe. So at an end of anesthesia, they often turn the oxygen way up, but they won't breathe for the patient because what they're trying to do is have that patient build up CO2. The reason why that is in a way, that's why you cannot hold your breath and kill yourself, because what happens is when you hold your breath, immediately your CO2 starts to rise. The CO2 hits the brain and tells the brain that you have to take a breath. So you can't. So the brain and the CO2 is a stimulating aspect of taking a breath. So all those dangers, by doing those things, they may reduce the dangers, but they don't eliminate them. And they end up spending more money because they're changing their absorbent faster, they're using more anesthetic agent, those kind of things. Amsorb Plus contains no sodium hydroxide. Once again, NaOH is the bane and the bad chemical of anything. So when you go into a facility and you find out that they're using Medisorb, you should say, do you realize you're using an absorbent that has sodium hydroxide in it? And just, you need to go look at that and see if it has sodium hydroxide. I'm 100% sure it does. And if it does, you need to understand what the problems are with that. Amsorb Plus is incapable of producing harmful toxins such as compound A, formaldehyde, and carbon monoxide under all circumstances, under any circumstances. Amsorb Plus is incapable of producing those. Amsorb Plus also has a permanent color change. We change color based on desiccation or dryness. Amsorb Plus contains no strong alkali metals, metal hydroxide, and is not caustic to your touch or to the environment. This is a page out of the Amsorb Plus literature or manual, if you will, and it's one of the key pages you should always show someone. It shows Amsorb Plus, made by Armstrong Medical, contains 0% sodium hydroxide, has no other additives. It has less than 3% calcium hydroxide. That's our triggering agent. We have a permanent color change. If you notice, no one else has a permanent color change. We also do not degrade the agents. So the anesthetic agents, as they pass through other absorbents, they, especially absorbents that have been desiccated or dried out or used, they degrade the agent and it converts to these other toxins. So the agent gets effective and it produces bad chemicals. And we don't, under all circumstances or any circumstances, do we ever produce those toxins, yet you can see everybody else, when they're dried out, can produce those toxins. So if you go down here to some of our main competitors, Medisorb, GE Healthcare. Now, GE Healthcare no longer is involved with Medisorb, and they're about to announce that they are distancing themselves from Medisorb. Medisorb is now sold by a separate company that GE Healthcare has nothing to do with. It's called Vyaire. But Medisorb has less than 3% sodium hydroxide, but it does not have permanent color change, and it can produce all these toxins. Another one that you'll hear, Sotasorb has 3.7. Dragazorb has 1 to 3%. Once again, if they have any percent at all, they are capable of producing those toxins. Okay. This shows the efficiency of Amsorb Plus. It's not only safe, because it doesn't produce any carbon monoxide. This shows all these are different studies. So there's over 70 different studies that basically support Amsorb Plus. Our competitors have nowhere near the number of studies. In fact, they may not have any studies. And if they do have a study, it's an internal study that was done. So these are all independent studies that have been proven, and you can look up, and we can give you samples. But basically, the CO production from Amsorb Plus is 0, even when you become dried out or desiccated. Here in Medisorb is actually the industry leader in CO2 production when the canister's been dried out. So you would ask your anesthesia provider, how many parts per million of carbon monoxide do you like delivering to your patients? Well, nobody wants to deliver carbon monoxide to their patients. So it's kind of a loaded question. And you show them this and say, there's no chance for carbon monoxide production, yet you're using Medisorb, and there's the highest chance as it's being used. And this is probably why they're changing it. That's probably one of the key things you have to ask is, how are they changing their absorbent and why? Okay. So, hospitals announce renewed commitment to environmental. All of our hospitals are trying to be more green earth concerned. So they've committed all kinds of goals for recycling, etc. Amsorb Plus basically meets these green initiatives because we are not caustic. We are not a negative detriment to landfills. In fact, basically by the pH and the acidity level that we're actually probably, you've heard of acid rain. We're almost a chemical that helps reduce the effects of acid rain. So we actually could be a benefit to the environment. So we are safe to handle. We are non-caustic. We have a lower pH. Our pH is 12 and below, and anything above 12 is believed to have to be red bagged. And all of the other absorbents, Dragersorb, all of them that have sodium hydroxide end up with a pH that's higher than 12, and thus they should be red bagged. When you red bag something, it means you're not disposing of it in regular trash. When you dispose of something in regular trash, it's pennies. When you dispose of something in a red bag, that means it has to be incinerated, it has to be handled specially. It's grouped in with biological, things, and basically the cost is 10 to 20 times higher to dispose of something that's in a red bag. So sometimes the cost of disposing, a 2 or 3 pound canister of absorbent in a red bag situation could be add $5 to the cost of that absorbent. So you may have paid only $8 or $10 for that canister, but it's going to cost you $5 to dispose of it. So your total cost is $15. Then you add in the agents that you may have lost. So it's a serious situation. So we don't have any caustic dust, and we're not harmful to the metal of the machines. This is a statement by Southern California facilities that basically said they had uncovered the use of a new CO2 absorbent, Absorb, used on newer GE machines, that all facilities currently are in the process of. The absorbent was recently tested like Sodazorb and other soda lime-based absorbents we've looked at before, was found to be a corrosive waste in California and some other states with a pH above 12.5 after use. Amsorb Plus is still the only CO2 absorbent we've tested with a pH below 12.5. So as a result, they're saying that everything above that, such as Absorb, has to be red bagged, and anything such as Amsorb Plus would not need to be red bagged. And we can share that with you. The pH sliding scale, we are 12 and below. Anything above 12 gets to be 14, which some of these absorbents, it's liquid drain cleaner, it's a caustic soda, so it's like Drano. The bleaches are not great, and oven cleaners, whereas 12 and below, we're household products, milk of magnesia, so they're definitely various soda limes fresh is in the 13.5 range, and when they're dried out, they're 14 plus pH. So truly is a dangerous thing. Amsorb Plus has a higher absorption capacity than soda limes. Amsorb Plus, so in other words, we absorb more CO2 as it passes through our chemical. Amsorb Plus adsorbs less anesthetic agent as it passes through. So as a result, you'll get faster response. When you go to 2% or 3%, you'll get that 3% to the patient faster. Thus, they'll go to sleep faster. They'll also wake up faster when you turn it off. Amsorb Plus has been shown in an independent study to offer the following savings when compared to soda lime. Reduction in anesthetic gas use, so anesthetic agents, by 26%, a reduction in absorbent use by 58%. In other words, they used our absorbent to its completion once it caused inspired CO2, and a reduction in disposable costs of 93% when you compare red bagging versus, and that was a study done in 2011. This is actually the Mannion study, 2011, that was done in Ireland, and basically we have this all printed out for you to look at, and basically they did a study of 4 operating rooms and compared all the things as much scientifically as they could, and they were able to use 34 canisters with soda lime, only 14 canisters, because once again they were able to use them to completion. So basically significant cost savings. That's something we all ought to read, and I'll send out to you. But there's the 58% reduction. There's the 25% reduction. Machines equilibrate faster and more accurately. They reach the desired percentage. So when you dial in 3%, you'll get to 3% faster with Amsorb Plus because we don't have adsorption. And there's no need to set the vaporizers higher because we'll get to that dialed in setting. This shows basically Amsorb Plus and Well, it basically shows the amount of absorption. So you have Medisorb. Basically, it takes, so this is time down here. So in a span of 20 minutes, let's say, let's take a look at it. With Amsorb Plus, we're in 5 minutes, we're close. If they dialed 4%, we're within a couple percentages of 4% almost immediately, and we stay at that. With Medisorb, which within 5 minutes, they're not even at 2%. At 10 minutes, they're at 2.5%. At 20 minutes, they're at 3%. So it's not for 40 minutes till they equivalate and get to the 4% that the clinician dialed in. With low flow Absorb, which is another competitive product, it even takes longer. So adsorption is a key factor to be aware of. Amsorb Plus can also be a sole source solution. We offer all the different canisters. We're even coming out with the Care Station 600 canister that should be available in September and October. So we cover all GE machines. We also cover all Draeger machines, all Mindray machines, and all Penline machines. So currently a hospital might be purchasing CO2 absorbent from multiple different manufacturers and multiple distributors. They can buy all their absorbent from one manufacturer, and that's why we've been successful more often than not with Amsorb Plus to get IDNs to sign on board. We have IDN contracts with ROI, which is Mercy Healthcare. We have an IDN contract with St. Mary's Healthcare, SSM. We have an IDN contract with Dignity Healthcare. We have an IDN contract with BJC Healthcare. So getting a IDN contract is a great strategy with Amsorb Plus because it allows you to convert a whole hospital system, if you will. So we have canisters that will fit all the machines. Amsorb Plus also is in containers that fits every model. Hospitals consolidate their CO2 absorbent sourcing from one manufacturer, and we offer a price matching strategy and a guarantee. Amsorb Plus is also stocked by Owens & Minor, Cardinal Health, and Medline for multiple facilities. So basically, we have contracts with arrangements with Cardinal. They give us tracing. So if your hospital uses Cardinal or Owens & Minor as their just-in-time delivery system and they want to go to Amsorb Plus, they can easily get that through on a daily basis through their just-in-time manufacturer, and it works out great for us. These are some of the references accounts that are using Amsorb Plus throughout the country. There's numerous ones, but this is just a selection of them. Cleveland Clinic, Mercy Health, BJC, Dignity Health. So it's a pretty nice resume. So kind of in summary, Amsorb Plus is safer for the patients because there's no toxins. It also offers permanent color change. It's better for the environment because it has a lower pH. It's not caustic. It's not corrosive, whereas other soda limes are. It's safer to handle in the operating room. You don't have to worry about breathing in a caustic dust. It requires no special precautions. It doesn't have to be red bagged, so you don't have the expense of red bagging. It is approved for regular trash, and it breaks down into harmless compounds in the landfills and doesn't affect our water table. Whereas all soda limes with sodium hydroxide have a negative impact on our environment. We're cost effective. Less product is actually used because you can frequently change it less, because you can go to a point of inspired CO2. So once you get inspired CO2, it means that the absorbent has reached a maximum absorption of CO2. Less drug use is used, so that can save a lot of money. You know, they can also do lower gas flows. That's a key thing we'll talk about in a moment. But basically, because we don't produce any toxins, they can use lower flows of oxygen while they're doing their anesthetic for sevoflurane, for example. So right now there's a MAC level of 2 that's kind of recommended by sevoflurane, which means they have to have at least 2 liters of flow going. And when you have 2 liters of flow that go through and go past the vaporizer, it picks up a certain amount of agent. If you're able to reduce your flows down to 1 liter of flow or even 500 cc's of flow because you're using the circle system and the patient's rebreathing their oxygen and rebreathing their anesthetic agent, you will use more absorbent, but you will use much less anesthetic agent. Anesthetic agent and nitrous oxide are one of the worst offenders to our ozone layer. So an anesthesia provider may not be that concerned about saving the hospital money or any of those issues, saving on anesthetic agents, but they will be interested in the fact that they will be able to reduce their carbon footprint by using lower flows safely with our absorbent. What I'm going to do now is go through a presentation I would do if I was in front of the customer. Before I do that, though, I'm going to just show you live. This is the standard canister that's used on Mindray anesthesia, Penlon, and GE Estivas. GE Estiva is an older one, anesthesia machine. Some people call this the standard, pre-pack. They might call it the one that's disc-shaped, D-I-S-K, or they might call it the one that's like a big hockey puck. This is our Amsorb Plus canister. And like I said, this would fit into a Mindray machine or, Penlon or an Estiva. This is a beer mug version. This is what is used in most newer GE machines, such as the ACES machine, the Avance machine, the Aspire machine. I call this a beer mug. Theirs is shaped a little bit differently, but it does have a handle. You might notice this one is partially color changed, so this shows that this one was used, so it's a little bit more violet up here, and then it's slightly violet over there. This is the canister that's used for a Draeger machine, and what's significant is that we really have an opening and an opportunity to attack anybody that's using Draegersorb. Prior to this last year, we did not have a Draeger canister that could fit on any Draeger machine with what they call the click adapter without us providing them an adapter. Since then, we've changed the top of this, so this can fit on any Draeger machine without an adapter. So in the past, we have not been able to compete well for Draeger machines absorbent, but now we can. Those are what the canisters look like. And well, I guess what I'll do real quick, let's spend a couple, any specific questions with regards to that PowerPoint? Okay, we'll hold those to the end. So one of the most important things to know when you're making an anesthesia sales call, when you're trying to focus on Amsorb Plus, is to find out what absorbent they're using now. And you would even ask them, can you bring out one of your canisters? You might also ask what kind of anesthesia machines you have now, because that'll tell you what kind of canister they're using. But ideally, have them bring a canister out, take a picture of it, and send it to me, and then I'll be able to tell you what strategy you should use. When they bring that canister out, or even if they don't bring the canister out, the key thing to ask them is, what absorbent are you using now, and how are you changing it, and why? So you just say, when do you change your absorbent? Are you changing it based on color change? And then you would ask, they say, yeah, when it turns a little purple, we change it. You might ask them, are you changing it at half color, a third color, a fourth color, and get an indication of what they're trying to do. You'll come across some accounts that might be changing it based on inspired CO2, and they're using an absorbent such as Medisorb, and that's can be dangerous, so we need to help them understand the dangers of using a sodium hydroxide based absorbent and at the same time trying to do push that absorbent beyond its normal usage, because basically as a color change occurs, that portion that's color change can produce those toxins. So if they push it to a point of inspired CO2, it's going to be very exhausted, and the possibility, or desiccated, if you will, the possibility of producing those toxins is significant. So let's say you go to an account, they say, oh, we're using Medisorb, and we have a combination of Estiva machines, which I know Estivas use the canister, and we have some newer machines that are Aspires and GE ACES machines, so that means they're using the beer mug machines. I would ask them once again, well, how are you changing your absorbent? Are you changing it based on color change? And they might say yes, and once again you ask, when do they change it? And say, if you know they're using Medisorb, you need to draw their attention. Are you aware that you're using an absorbent that contains sodium hydroxide? And they might say yes, or they might say no, I'm not aware. I'll say, well, the dangers of sodium hydroxide is that it produces toxins under conditions when the absorbent starts to dry out, and it produces a caustic chemical that is dangerous for our environment. It also impacts your anesthetic agents. So there's a lot of dangers to sodium hydroxide. They need to know that their absorbent contains sodium hydroxide. Likewise, they need to know that there's a new absorbent out that doesn't contain sodium hydroxide. And that's when you would bring out this literature booklet, if you will. I'm going to try to lower the display and hopefully just show the booklet, and I'll try to reverse it so as if I'm presenting it to a customer. But Amsorb Plus is an absorbent that is based on calcium hydroxide, and that is basically shown here. As it's being utilized, it produces calcium bicarbonate, which is a mild antacid, kind of similar to a Tums chemical. Because we don't have sodium hydroxide, we don't produce any toxins. We don't produce any compound A, no formaldehyde, and no carbon monoxide. So Amsorb Plus truly is a different chemical than they're used to using. Plus, Amsorb Plus is available in all the canisters to be able to be used on any anesthesia machine. We no longer need these adapters, but we make a canister, a pre-packed canister for every anesthesia machine on the market in the U.S. This page shows a couple things. It basically shows how our absorbent, how Medisorb will change colors, and then an hour, in this case, I think it was 90 minutes later, change back. I haven't seen it change back quite that fast, but it can. I've seen it. Very rarely do we see a Medisorb canister used that much. It's usually basically a third color change, and they change it. But basically, what's occurring as the CO2 as it dries out, the percentage of sodium hydroxide increases, and that becomes a problem. So having an absorbent that, let's say they were all equal, but our absorbent has permanent color change, that's a significant advantage, because you know where you stand. If you're a third color change on a Friday, you're going to be a third color change on Monday, whereas with Medisorb and any other soda lime, you're going to be a white absorbent on Monday, and it's going to look like you're fresh, and in reality, you're not. So what about CO2 performance? So how much CO2 absorption capacity do we have? Well, this shows a bunch of different studies that were done. It shows Amsorb Plus lasted 290 minutes, and it absorbed 145 liters per kilogram. The most important one to look at is Medisorb, because that has the biggest market share. It's no longer part of GE, but they did 268 minutes, and 135 liters per kilogram of CO2 is absorbed. So we were significantly more than them. The only absorbent that comes close to us in performance is Dragersorb. Otherwise, we surpass the other companies significantly. This is that one page that we talked about in the presentation that basically shows that we have 0% sodium hydroxide. Everybody else has traces, and as a result, we produce no toxins, and everyone else has the potential of producing toxins. We also are the only one that has permanent color change. They all will revert back to white. And these are all independent studies. We also, when you talk about CO2 absorption or capacity, this is another reiteration of our efficiency, our capability. This shows a couple studies that showed we absorbed 205 and 155 liters per kilogram. Draeger did 217, so they were very close to us. But Medisorb, our biggest competitor, which one is Medisorb? I'm looking at this upside down. Here's Medisorb, was only 107. So even though you'll have situations where clinicians will say, hey, my perception is this is not lasting as long, you can point to these studies and say that, you know, your perception may be that it's probably because you're just paying attention to it and you weren't before. But studies, independent studies, show that we're almost twice the absorption capacity. Now, what does occur sometimes is when we go in and we tell them that you can do lower flows, that will affect the absorption life of a canister, because when you do lower flows, you're actually using your absorbent more because the patient's rebreathing their CO2. So as a result, you'll save, if you cut your flows in half, you'll cut your agent usage in half during maintenance of anesthesia, but you will also use a lot more CO2 absorbent. But the difference in cost of CO2 absorbent compared to anesthetic agent is about tenfold. So if you use twice as much CO2 absorbent and cut your agent usage in half, you will be way ahead financially. So basically, studies show that we absorb more CO2 than our competitors. This was the one we did earlier. It says CO2 production, and that Medisorb is the industry leader. When it dries out, it has the potential of producing up to 13,000 parts per million of carbon monoxide. Once again, you'd ask your clinicians, what percentage of carbon monoxide do you like delivering? Of course, they would say none. It also references the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation that I think it was 2006, so really pretty long time ago, and Abbott basically came out and endorsed a non-alkali CO2 absorbent and new technologies, and Amsorb Plus was indicated as one of those that doesn't contain sodium hydroxide. There's a section on adsorption. As you get used to selling CO2 absorbent, this is something to be talking about, but basically this is the effect that we don't adsorb as much, so as a result, when you dial in 3%, you're going to get 3%. As a result, your patients are going to go to sleep faster, and when you turn off the absorbent, it's going to respond faster. So even at low flows, because lower flows, usually things take a little while to adsorb. Let's see. That's the highlights of this booklet, but I would recommend reading this booklet multiple times because it really will help you understand and help communicate. And this is a booklet you can get from Aaron Messman or from Bell Medical. We would recommend that you would hand this out along with our Road to Success document. Okay, so I'm going to try to bring up some Road to Success documents, but in the meantime, I'm going to unmute everyone and ask for any questions that you might have. And I'm going to try to bring up some other documents. Okay, I think I'm screen sharing now, but I'm having trouble bringing up. I'm going to just stop that. Anyway, do we have any other questions as a result of Amsorb Plus? I can't be that good at explaining chemistry, but if you look at our Road to Success documents, and I'll forward you the Mannion study, and I encourage you, whether you've been selling Amsorb Plus for 6 years or 6 weeks, you really need to get a hold of Aaron Messman and get him in your territory. You make a couple calls with him, you'll understand the product better, and he will convert accounts in front of your eyes. So it's hard to argue when we basically say to an anesthesia provider, we're willing to do a price matching strategy. In other words, you're not going to be asked to pay more, yet we're going to give you an absorbent that has no possibility of producing toxins, has a permanent color change, will allow more effective use of your agents, will also allow you to do lower flows and thus reduce agent cost, and also is significantly better for the environment. Amsorb Plus is not caustic and has a lower pH, so it can be safely put in landfills. And when you do reduce your anesthetic agents, you're not only saving money for the hospital, but you're also reducing the impact or the carbon footprint of that anesthesia provider, because anesthetic agent and nitrous oxide are terrible for the ozone layer, much, much, much worse than carbon monoxide or tailpipe gas from automobiles. So it's incredible, the difference.